The government just shut itself down over a voting fraud crisis, and the FBI director couldn't name a single conviction, not one. In a Senate hearing, Kash Patel was asked how many non-citizens have been convicted of voting in U.S. elections in the last 10 years. The director of the FBI had no answer. Then came the number nobody wanted to say out loud: 77 cases in 24 years, found not by the Justice Department but by the Heritage Foundation. And while Congress grinds to a halt over a threat that doesn't exist in any intelligence report, it turns out the government already seized a territory's voting machines and didn't tell a single oversight committee. This isn't incompetence. This is a pattern.
I'm going to recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Director Gabbard, as was well covered yesterday in January, you were present at the execution of an FBI warrant at the Fulton County, Georgia election office at the direction of the president and to all appearances in connection with the president's false claims about the 2020 election. The unsealed affidavit submitted by the FBI made zero reference to foreign powers or outside interference. I don't want to relitigate the reasons why you were there, but I do want to know whether, as a result of your visit, there is credible intelligence in your possession pointing to foreign interference in Georgia in the 2020 election.
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member. As you know, over each of the previous elections, there is an ongoing effort by different foreign entities.
Ma'am, it's a very specific question. Is there intelligence in your possession relative to foreign interference in the 2020 elections? Very simple, straightforward question.
We are continuing to look at previous attempts to interfere in our elections and any ongoing threats that may exist for the upcoming elections.
Okay, but can I assume that the answer to my question is no, that you have no specific intelligence related to foreign meddling in the Georgia election?
We are continuing to look into this matter.
Okay. Director, the ODNI has confirmed on the record that your office took custody of voting machines from Puerto Rico last May. I'm not aware of any previous DNI taking similar actions. Did your office promptly notify the committee about taking custody of Puerto Rico's voting machines?
I don't believe we did. However, this was done at the request of the Puerto Rico AUSA attorney.
Ma'am, it's a yes or no question. The answer, as you have acknowledged, is no. You did not inform the committee about the taking of a territory's voting machines. Is there a specific foreign threat? And I've read the reporting that you were looking for possible foreign threats, but is there a specific foreign threat that drove you to take this action?
There were questions about whether or not there were vulnerabilities that a threat could have taken advantage of, and that was the purpose for their requesting us to look into those vulnerabilities.
Where are those voting machines now?
I believe they are held in a secure facility at ODNI.
Have you or other ODNI officials taken any other state or territory's voting equipment into custody?
Not to my knowledge.
I want to turn in the subject of elections to a paradoxical thing. You will all be aware that the U.S. government is apparently going to grind to a halt. The president is going to sign no more bills. The Senate will spend 2 weeks apparently debating the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act, of course, would make illegal foreigners voting in U.S. elections, which is already illegal. So we are to do no more business because of apparently the existential threat to our democracy associated with foreigners voting in our elections. I am therefore puzzled by the fact that neither the unclassified nor the classified threat assessment makes any reference to risk or danger associated with foreigners voting in our elections. Director Patel, how many non-citizens have been convicted of voting in U.S. elections in the last 10 years?
The conviction stats are with the Department of Justice. I defer to them on that.
You are the director of the FBI. Give me a guess. How many convictions in the last 1 year, 5 year, or 10 years? Ballpark.
I don't have that with me, sir. Again, it's with the department.
You don't have that with, okay. Director Patel, how many active investigations does the FBI have into foreign individuals voting in U.S. elections?
We have a number of investigations, generally speaking, ongoing about individuals across the country.
Yeah, I'm asking for that number.
I don't have that number with me, but I have a number of them.
You have a number of investigations. Okay, is that number 10,000? Is it closer to 10,000 or closer to 10?
It's probably somewhere in between.
Okay. Will you please provide the committee with that number?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Director Patel, since you don't have the numbers, would it surprise you to know that the Heritage Foundation, which is not exactly the Columbia University Faculty Lounge, found only 77 instances of non-citizen voting in the 24 years between 1999 and 2023, each of which faced investigation by the appropriate authorities. So Heritage has a number of 77 examples in 24 years. Does that number surprise you?
No, because it's low.
I don't understand your answer.
You asked me if I was
Are you
surprised by that
disputing,
number.
are you
I'm not.
disputing that the number is in the range of 77 examples of non-U.S. citizens voting in U.S. elections in a 24-year period?
I just said that number's low.
You think that number is low? Okay. So why, if this is a meaningful issue, do we have no, and I guess I direct this to Director Gabbard, why is there no mention of this thing that will grind the American government to a halt for a 2-week period in the worldwide threats analysis?
This annual threat assessment was shaped around the national security strategy's prioritization of threats to our nation and our nation's interests. There are multiple platforms and venues where there have been and there will be reporting on threats to our foreign threats to our elections.
I yield back.
Let me tell you what this hearing actually was. Because on the surface, it looks like a routine oversight session with 2 officials answering questions. It was not routine. What you just watched was a senior member of the House Intelligence Committee dismantle, piece by piece, the factual foundation of one of the most consequential political narratives in America right now. And neither of the 2 most powerful law enforcement officials in the country could stop him. Let's start with Georgia, because that's where the first crack appears. And it's a big one. In January, Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, was physically present at the FBI's execution of a warrant on the Fulton County Election Office. Think about what that means for a second. The DNI doesn't show up to local warrant executions. That's not a procedural norm she was bending. That's something that, to my knowledge, has never happened before in the modern history of American intelligence. So Himes asked the most logical question imaginable. Was there credible intelligence pointing to foreign interference in Georgia's 2020 election? Because if there wasn't, if there was no actual intelligence product driving that visit, no foreign fingerprints, no threat assessment that justified it, then what exactly was the nation's top intelligence official doing there? Gabbard's answer was not a yes. It was not even a careful, classified no. It was a loop. We continue to look into ongoing threats. Foreign entities continue to make efforts. We are monitoring previous attempts. Every sentence pointed somewhere else. Every sentence was about a different question than the one being asked. Himes named that plainly. He said he would take her non-answer as a no, and here's why that moment matters more than it looks. When the Director of National Intelligence cannot confirm the existence of the intelligence that supposedly justified a highly unusual federal action at a state election office, that is not a bureaucratic awkwardness. That is an accountability failure in the most literal sense of the word. But that was just the opening, because then came Puerto Rico. And this is the part of this hearing that I think deserves far more attention than it's getting. At some point before this hearing, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence took custody of voting machines from Puerto Rico. Let that land, not CISA, the agency actually responsible for election security infrastructure, not the FBI acting under a court order. The ODNI, an intelligence agency whose core mandate is foreign threat assessment, took possession of an American territory's voting equipment, and they did not notify the Congressional Oversight Committee. When Himes asked Gabbard directly whether the committee had been informed, she said, "I don't believe we did." I want you to hear how extraordinary that is. She didn't say, "We made a mistake and we're correcting it." She didn't say, "There was a classified reason we couldn't notify you." She said she didn't believe they had delivered quietly, without apparent alarm, as if it were a minor administrative detail. Congressional notification in situations like this isn't a courtesy. It's the mechanism by which the American public, through its elected representatives, maintains any visibility into what its intelligence agencies are doing. When that mechanism breaks down around election infrastructure, check, of all things, The question is no longer whether a rule was bent. The question is what else has been happening that the committee doesn't know about. When Himes asked where the machines are now, Gabbard said she believed they were held at a secure ODNI facility. She believed. The Director of National Intelligence believed she knew where a territory's seized election equipment was being stored. That's not a slip of language. That's a window into how loosely this is being tracked at the highest level. And if you think that's alarming, wait. Because the third thread of this hearing is where it all comes together, the SAVE Act. For those who aren't tracking every corner of the legislative calendar, the SAVE Act is a bill designed to address the supposed crisis of non-citizens voting in American elections. At the time of this hearing, it was consuming so much political oxygen that Congress was effectively at a standstill. No bills being signed. 2 weeks of Senate floor time dedicated to it. The United States government grinding to a halt, all over the claim that foreign nationals voting in American elections represents a clear and present threat to democracy. So Himes asked Kash Patel, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a question so simple it almost sounds like a trap. How many non-citizens have been convicted of voting in U.S. elections in the last 10 years? Patel said the conviction statistics were held by the Department of Justice and deferred to them. Himes pushed, "Give me a guess." Patel said he didn't have that with him. I want to be precise about what just happened there. The director of the FBI was asked, in a congressional hearing, to estimate the scale of a crime that his agency investigates. A crime that is, at that very moment, being used to justify shutting down the United States government, and he could not offer even a ballpark number. Not a range, not an order of magnitude, nothing. Himes then asked how many active FBI investigations exist into non-citizens voting. Patel said there were a number of them. Himes asked for that number. Patel said it was somewhere between 10 and 10,000. Somewhere between 10 and 10,000. If you ran a small business and your accountant told you your quarterly revenue was somewhere between $10 and $10,000, you would find a new accountant. Patel is the director of the most powerful domestic law enforcement agency on earth, and that is the precision he brought to Congress on the central justification for a legislative emergency. Then Himes put the number on the table. The Heritage Foundation, not a liberal institution, not a university think tank, but one of the most prominent conservative policy organizations in the country, found 77 instances of non-citizen voting across a 24-year period between 1999 and 2023. 77. In a country that casts hundreds of millions of votes across that span. Patel's response was that the number sounded low, and I understand what he was reaching for. He was implying the real number might be higher. But here's the problem with that move. He had just told Congress, under oath, that he didn't have the real number. So he couldn't dispute 77 with evidence. He could only dispute it with implication. That is not how the director of the country's premier law enforcement agency should be testifying about the factual basis for a national legislative crisis. And then Himes delivered the question that I think is genuinely unanswerable. If the threat of non-citizens voting is real enough to stop the United States government in its tracks, real enough to consume 2 weeks of Senate floor time and freeze the legislative calendar, why does the annual Worldwide Threat Assessment contain no mention of it? This is the document where the intelligence community tells Congress what actually keeps them up at night. Foreign adversaries, cyber attacks, weapons proliferation, non-citizens voting in American elections. Not a footnote, not a classified annex, not a single line. Gabbard's response was that the threat assessment is shaped around national security priorities and that other platforms exist for election threat reporting, which is a careful way of saying it didn't rise to the level of the threat assessment. So here is what this hearing actually revealed, and I want to say this as clearly as I can. 3 separate threads: the Georgia raid, the Puerto Rico machines, the SAVE Act. All 3 point to the same underlying problem. Actions are being taken, legislation is being advanced, and political narratives are being constructed around threats that the people responsible for identifying those threats cannot substantiate when asked directly and under oath. That's not a partisan observation. That's what the transcript shows. And the mechanism that caught it, the thing that made this visible, was congressional oversight doing exactly what it's supposed to do. A lawmaker with specific questions, witnesses obligated to answer them, a public record of whether those answers hold up. When that mechanism works, it protects everyone, regardless of party. When it doesn't, when officials can take custody of election equipment without notifying oversight, when the FBI director can't quantify the crisis he's supposed to be managing, when the DNI can't confirm the intelligence behind her own presence at a warrant execution, the system is running blind. And a system running blind around elections is not a partisan problem. It is the problem. Democracy doesn't fail in a single dramatic moment. It fails quietly in the gap between what officials claim they're doing and what they can actually prove when someone sits across the table and asks the simplest possible questions. Today, in that room, someone asked those questions. The answers should concern all of us.